Hello, my friends. I have got another paint along video for you. I'm Dawn with Painted Willow Art. I assume because you're here, you know that, but just in case you're new to my channel, today I have some fun ones for you. My channel started doing a lot of kind of funky, whimsical animals, and over the last 2 years, I've gotten a lot of requests from you all to do something like dinosaurs or reptiles. We've not done those yet. And I know a lot of you do some of these paint alongs and draw alongs with kids or grandkids. So I wanted to do some fun dinosaur-y, reptile-y things today. I'm going to show you how to draw them, and then we're going to paint them. So these are what we're going to make today. To get us started, I've got a piece of watercolor paper, and that's simply because I'm going to watercolor mine. You don't have to use watercolor. If you want to draw these on regular paper and use colored pencils or crayons or markers, something like that, certainly, go ahead and do that. I'm using watercolors just because that's the medium I choose. So I've got a piece of 140-pound watercolor paper. I've got it taped just to a cardboard board so that my paper won't warp very badly. You probably wouldn't have to tape this one down because we're not going to use a ton of water like we've done on some of the other paintings, but it's just habit for me to tape it down. So I've just taped my edges to the board with some painter's tape. Painter's tape can be kind of sticky, so I did take each piece of tape and like stick it to the leg of my pants before I put it on the paper. That way it detacks it a little bit and helps prevent it from ripping the paper when you take it off later. I've got a round paintbrush. This one is a number 6 size. My paper is 9 by 12, so for the drawings we're going to do, this is going to be a good size. You would size your brush to the size paper you're going to use. The size paper doesn't really matter. You would just scale the drawing up or down depending on what size your paper is. Got a pencil and eraser. We're going to need those to draw with. I've got a black pen to do some outlining when we're done. And I've got a set of watercolor paints. Off camera up here, I've got a couple of bowls of water to use for my paints. I am using an art philosophy set of paints. This one's their tropical set, and I like this one because it's got a whole bunch of different colors in it, and it's a nice inexpensive set to start with. They're really good quality paints, but it's not going to cost not going to break the bank if you are looking for a good set of watercolor paints to start with. So for today, those are all the supplies we're going to use. These aren't going to be terribly complicated. So we're going to get started with, I don't know if it's T-Rex or Godzilla, something like that to get started. So let me zoom you in a little bit and we'll start the drawing process on that one. Okay, I'm going to start this one kind of in the upper corner of my paper. That way I'll have room on here for all 3 of them. So I'm going to make it maybe about the size of my hand. That way it'll give me room elsewhere on the paper for the other drawings. So to start this one, essentially we're going to do these like we've done a lot of the other drawings on my channel. We're going to start with basic shapes and kind of build on those shapes. So for the head for this guy, we're going to draw a rounded off rectangle. So draw your rectangle, but round off your corners a little bit so that you don't have hard, sharp corners. Okay? From this corner right here, almost right at the corner, we're going to come off and draw kind of a U shape. That's going to be the line of its back. And then from right about here, we're going to draw another one, but we're going to make it kind of come down and get fatter through here and up to meet the tail here so that we end up with kind of that big barreled chest and belly look right here. Okay. Something like that. For its legs, we're going to come down right in here because it's got T-Rex or Godzilla type of thing, has those 2 big hind legs at the back. So I'm going to start up here in the body just a little bit, and we're going to cross this line, but we'll come back and erase it. So I'm going to bring just kind of a curved line down like that. And then I'm going to give him some pointy toes. Curve the heel and come right back up into the body right there. And then we'll erase this line in the middle. So we've got a leg. He needs to have a second leg, but it's going to be on the other side of the body, so we're not going to see the whole thing. So I'm just going to kind of make another one right here that mimics the same shape but looks like it's behind it. So I'm going to start this one from the body line and just bring that same kind of curved line down. And then give him some more pointy toes and just bring it back into the one in front of him. Make that a little darker so you guys can see it better. So that looks like he's got 2 legs there. For the front arms, we're going to do kind of the same thing. These arms are going to be much smaller, so I'm going to start up here, about midway on the body. And I'm going to bring just a little curved line around. And another one. That's going to be its arm. And then off that arm, we're going to give it some pointy hands that kind of mimic the feet. And then we'll do the same thing right below that, only not coming into the body this time. We'll just start right at the body, make those same 2 curved lines, and some pointy feet. So they kind of almost look like claws. And then this little line right here, we're going to come in and erase like we did on the big hind legs, so that it looks like that top arm is coming from the front of the body. This bottom arm is coming from behind the body. So you get a little bit of that 3D shape coming in there. Okay, we're going to give it some spikes down the back. My pencil keeps breaking. So we're just going to make some V shapes all the way down the back. And you're going to get smaller as you get towards the tip of the tail. So just some jaggedy lines down the back. Now we need to give this little critter some personality in its face. So we're going to give it a mouth first. And the easiest way to do that is to start at the front of the face here and just kind of draw a little bit of a diagonal line. Not quite halfway across the face. And we want to make it look like it has some sharp teeth. So I'm just going to put a few triangles right on that line. We want to give it some eyeballs. So I'm going to make another kind of diagonal line up towards the top of the head. And I'm just going to make some U shapes, and I'm going to make the front eyeball a little smaller than the back eyeball. So sometimes it's easier to do the back one first. Just make a U shape and then a little smaller U shape in front of it. And then right here in the corners, we're going to black those in. Okay? So zoom you in a little bit, you can see some of those details a little bit closer. It was a diagonal line with a U and another smaller U. And then in the corners, I just drew a little curved line and blacked that in so his eyes look like he's looking off that way. And then I mentioned the little triangles for teeth, in case you couldn't see those very well from the first camera angle. They're just little triangles that I drew on top of that diagonal line. So there we go. We got a T-Rexy Godzilla looking creature. Not sure which it is. It might be a cross between the two. I don't know. T-Rex doesn't have spines down its back. Godzilla does. I don't know. Something like that. My stuff's always whimsical, so it doesn't have to make sense, right? So we'll come back and paint that in a minute. I want to do all the drawing on all 3 of these first. So this next one is going to be this one. So I'm going to do that one right over here, and I'm going to leave the bottom of my paper for the alligator so it can go all the way across. So right about here, about that big, we're going to start this one with an upside down U, and we're going to kind of curve it a little bit. So instead of, coming straight up and over like you would for a U, we're going to bring it out and around a little bit. Oops. Hold the phone. Right shape, too close to the edge of the paper. I don't have enough room for my tail. So we're going to start over here and bring that up and around. So you can see it kind of comes in down here at the bottom, out and around. That's the contour of its back. To give it the first legs, I'm just going to kind of round this off here and make a straight line, and another one here, and then I'm going to come up with another little U there. So that gives it like its little belly spot. And then we need more legs, so I'm just going to put like little corner boxes there. We need to give it a head on one end, a tail on the other end. So we're going to do the head starting about right here. And I'm just going to come off with kind of another U shape. And then where this meets the body, I'm going to round that off a little bit. And the easiest way to do that, I want to get rid of this line in the middle anyway. So I'm going to get rid of that line by erasing it, and then just erase the very corners as well, because we don't want those to be sharp corners. And then I can come in and just round those off a little bit. So there, it's got a head. We're going to do essentially the same thing on the other end for the tail, only it's going to come up to a point, kind of like this one did. And I'm going to make it a little bit wider. Where the head is there, it's kind of narrow. I want this to be a little bit wider for the tail, so I'm going to go something like that. But I'm going to do it the same shape as the other one. I'm just going to make kind of a swoopy shape, round off the end of the tail, and then start down here and bring that up to meet the other one. And then I'm going to erase that line in the middle, erase the corners here again so that we can round them off. So it's got a tail. Now this guy often has those big plates across its back, so we're going to draw those. We're not going to worry too much about how exact those are because they often are kind of wonky shaped anyway, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to start in the middle and then work my way forward and back. And I'm just going to make kind of a weird partial rectangle shape. As I get down towards the head, I'm going to get a little smaller. As I come back towards the tail, I'm going to get a little smaller. So this one in the middle that I started with is going to be the biggest one of the bunch. And then I'm just going to do that kind of same thing, working my way towards the head, getting smaller as I go. And same thing coming back this way. We're going to go all the way down the tail, getting smaller as we go. We need to give this little critter a face. It doesn't tend to have the big intimidating teeth hanging out like something like the first one does, so I'm just going to make a little curved line right here at the front of the face to make it look like it's smiling. And I'm going to give this one 2 round eyes. So there we've got 2 of them. I'm going to push this up. The last one that we're going to do is this little alligator crocodile guy. So I'm going to do that one across the bottom of my paper because he's a little wider than everybody else. So I've got this whole wide space at the bottom to do that one. I'm going to start at this side and work my way this way. So I'm going to start my head right about here. That way I know I've got plenty of room for my body and my tail over here. And the easiest way to start this one is to make 2 upside down U's. Actually, I'm going to make those a little bit bigger so it's easier for you to see. 2 upside down U's, or if you draw it this way, maybe it looks like an M. Either way. Those are going to be the eyes. We're going to come straight out for the snout, put another little upside down U on the end, and come down just a little bit to give his top jaw some weight, so there's some space there. And then I'm going to bring this line in and I'm going to kind of curve it down and up so that it ends about midway between my eyeballs. And what that's going to end up looking like is like that top jaw is going to let it smile a little bit. Okay. The bottom jaw is going to start in just a little bit from the top one. And it's going to come down a little bit and follow that kind of same curve. And I'm going to end it right about even with where this eye ends over here. Only it'll be down here at the bottom jaw. So something like that. Okay. We'll put a little dot in the snout. We'll put some circles for the eyes. We'll come back and fill those in with the pen when we're done painting. And I'm going to give it one little tooth hanging out right there. So that's the head. For the body, we're going to follow kind of the same concept we did for this one with big swooping lines. We're just going to do them a little bit differently. So for this guy, coming off of its head, I want this line to come up just a little bit, but I don't want it to come, you know, way up here, just a little bit. And then we're going to come back down to the tail. So we're going to give it just a little bit of a swoop. From the bottom jaw, I want it to come down, give it that big rounded belly, barrel chest, and back to the tail. So I'm going to come down here and up closer to the tail as I get to that end. If you wanted to give the tail a little more of a curl, you could certainly do that. Just curl that end a little more and bring it around. That gives it a little more of a, you know, kind of that tipped up tail look. For the legs, we're gonna do kind of like we did on this one, but we're not gonna go into quite as much detail. We're just gonna give him kind of little clubby feet. We'll start up in the body and just make a rounded off foot. And then do the same thing right here, only starting at the body and a rounded foot. Same thing back here. Oops. This is why we do these in pencil. If you get it drawn in and it doesn't look big enough or doesn't look like the right shape, just erase it and go back and do it again. I just needed to bring those down a little bit so that I have room for the one behind it. Okay, and then we'll come back and erase the line between here and here so that that foot looks like it's on this side of the body, like it's on our side, and gives us that little bit of a three-dimensional look. And then we're going to give this guy some armor down its back as well. So again, we're just making V's all the way down its back, getting smaller as we get to the tip of the tail. So there we go. Zoomed you back out. We've got all three of our critters there. So those were all fairly quick and easy to draw, nothing terribly complicated. We used just kind of basic shapes, U's and C's and rectangles to do all of these. So those should be fairly easy for even kids to draw. From here, we're going to go in and paint them and color them, and then we'll outline them and add some more details to it. So I'm going to look at my paints here and kind of decide what colors I'm going to use for these. Now, the way I paint Whimsical, they don't have to be the colors they should be. Normally, we would think of these as being, you know, kind of shades of green and things like that, but they don't have to be. They can be whatever colors you want them to be. I think I am going to do this one green just because he's screaming green at me for some reason. So I am going to use greens on this one, I think. This one, I think I'm feeling purple on this one, and I want a blue alligator. So those are the colors I'm going to use. So what I'm going to do is wet my paints just a little bit first to get them to soften up. So to soften those paints up, and the reason we do that is because it makes them easier to use a little bit quicker. If you just go in with a wet paintbrush and start swirling around in there, it's going to take you a little bit of time to get that paint loosened up and on the brush. So what I like to do with these is use these little pipettes, and you can get these online for just dirt cheap. Suck up a little bit of water and then just put a couple drops of water in the top of each of the paint colors you're going to use. And that just lets them soften up a little bit. I've done my green, my blues, I did purple, and I think I'm going to do a little bit of pink. That way I can mix some other colors in there just to have a little bit of fun with these guys. If you don't have any of those pipettes, you don't have to specifically go out and buy those. You can take your brush, get it really wet in the water, and let it drip in the tops of the pans. That would work. If you've got like an old hairspray bottle or something like that, once you're done using it, clean it out real good, and you can also mist the tops of these with a spray bottle. Any of those ways works. It's just a way to get that paint to start softening up so that it's a little easier to use a little quicker. So I'm going to zoom you back in. We'll start with that guy up there. Okay, so normally I would go back in and erase over this a little bit so that these lines aren't quite so dark. I've done them darker because I want you to be able to see them on camera better.
But do keep in mind that if you paint over the top of pencil with watercolor, it's essentially going to glue that pencil to the paper, so you won't be able to go in and erase it later. So I often like to go through and erase first, just so there's a very faint outline. That way it gives me a little bit more flexibility. If I kind of go out of the lines a little bit or something like that, I'm not going to see those pencil lines underneath, but I'm not going to worry about that with this one today. So I'm going to just pick up a little bit of green paint out of my pan. I don't want to do a whole lot to begin with because I don't want them to be really, really dark just yet. So I've got a little bit of green on my brush. I have not wet this first. So we're going to do wet on dry is what this is called, because I'm putting wet paint on top of dry paper. And I'm just going to start painting it in. And as I go, I'm going to dip my brush in the water and bring more water to my paper. I'm not getting any more paint. I'm just going to use this same amount of paint and spread it all over. Now, when I'm doing his head, I am going to be a little bit careful. I want to leave those teeth white, and I want to leave the eyes white. And so things like that is where a nice watercolor brush that comes to a good point at the tip will be helpful, because you won't need to switch brushes to a smaller brush. You can just keep using that same brush that you're using and just use the very tip of it to go around those smaller spaces. Now, if you notice your paint start to dry out while you're doing this, dip your brush in the water and come back with just some water and keep it wet. That way we can keep everything flowing while you finish painting it in. And I'm just going to keep dipping my brush in the water and coming back and using that water to keep this wet and the water to drag the paint around. Now, if you feel like you didn't end up with enough paint on your brush the first time to do this with just one load of paint, certainly go back to your pan and grab some more. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't want this guy to be real dark just yet. So I'm going to try and use as much of that paint that I had initially as I can. But if you need more, certainly go back to your pan and grab a little bit more. There's nothing wrong with that. So I just kind of keep going over it and over it and over it, and I'm just using the water to drag that paint around where I want it. So I've got the whole thing filled in. Now I'm going to go back and grab some more paint, and I'm just going to dot that paint in here and there where it's still wet. Now, if parts of your painting have dried out, get them wet with water before you start doing this, because I want specifically the water on there so that that paint spreads out. You can see how those dots didn't stay real solid dots. That paint kind of spread. That's what I want. I want that to kind of spread out and move around a little bit. And I think I'm going to go in and grab maybe a little bit of blue. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to dab that blue around, and you can see this didn't spread real well right here, and it's because that tail had dried out. So I'm just going to get a little bit of water, add a little bit more water there, and then do that again. I'm just going to grab some blue, and I'm tapping the blue around. And the only reason I'm doing that is it just makes him a little more interesting. It gives it a little bit of dimension, makes it a little more fun. It's not just flat green with nothing else going on. And I'm going to put a little bit of blue up here. Again, if you're noticing spots that are drying out, just dip your brush in a little bit of water, come back with the water. And then I'm going to do maybe a lighter green for the scales across the back. Now, this particular green, light green in my set is almost kind of a, I don't know, a lime green, closer to lemon yellow maybe. But that's what I'm going to use for the scales. So I'm just going to bring that in and start painting it in the scales, and it's going to bump up against wet spots on the body. And so what you're going to notice is that where that bumps up against wet spots in the body, it's going to kind of bleed into the body, and that's okay. I don't necessarily want a real hard line between my scales and the body. Again, gives it a little bit more personality. So I'm just going to run down the back, painting those in. Where it bumps up against the body, they might mesh together and the colors might bleed together a little bit, and that is perfectly okay. And then if you've still got some wet spots and you feel like it, you can take some of that color and just dot it around as well.
Add a little more color in there. Okay. So while that one's drying, I'm going to go on and paint my other two. That way it'll be dry and we can come back and do some pen work on it. So I'm going to move over to this one. And I'm going to essentially do the same thing, only this one I decided I'm going to do purple. So I've got my clean wet brush and I'm just running it around my purple paint. And I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I'm going to try and use just one dip of paint on my brush and just continue adding water to it to move that paint around. Now, depending on how big you did these, you might notice that like one edge of this starts to get dry. If you notice that, just go down there and work on that edge. So you're kind of working around, you know, both ends, all the edges at the same time to keep an edge from drying out, because if your edge dries out, whoops, if your edge dries out, you're going to get a hard line, okay? And I want this little guy's eyes to stay white. And if you noticed, I said oops there when I first came over here because I painted right into that eye. I just took my finger and wiped it out real quick. It was still wet, so most of the time, if you've still got wet paint, you can use like your finger or a paper towel, something like that, to wipe up a spot of paint that maybe got where you didn't want it to go. So I'm doing just like I did up above. I'm just coming back with more water, more water, more water, and keep dragging across and spreading that paint out. I don't know if it picks up on camera very well, but where I'm standing, I can see as I drag this, that leading edge of paint over here gets darker because I'm dragging paint that way. And I'm just going to continue to drag it and drag it and drag it until I get my whole thing filled in. I am kind of watching as I go and make sure that if this is starting to dry out over here, I just go back and hit it with my brush real quick. Keep that wet. I want the whole thing to stay wet if I can. And so it does sometimes feel like you're jumping around a little bit, but the benefit of keeping that whole thing wet is that then I can come back with other colors and dot them in like we did on the first one. And they all kind of meld and mingle together real nicely. So I just keep dipping in the water and coming back and dragging. There's not really any complicated technique to this. Just keep it wet, keep dragging the paint around. And then I think with this little guy, I'm going to come back with some pink. So I rinsed my brush and I got some pink, and I'm just doing like I did on the first one. I'm just kind of dotting that pink around. And you'll notice that this behaves quite a bit differently than the green did above. These pink dots aren't spreading out as much as the green did. And that's just a difference in the paint. Some pigments spread out better than others. And that's okay. That's part of the reason it's good to just play with your paints. That way you'll have a pretty good idea. Now you'll notice I missed my two little legs down here. So I just cleaned off my brush and went back to grab a little bit more purple. And I'm just going to come back and fill those in. That's a little bit dark for what I wanted. So I just rinsed my brush off and I'm coming back with a clean brush to spread that paint around. Now, having it a little bit darker than the rest of the body is okay, because then it looks like those legs are on the back side. And I think I'm going to use pink for my scales across the top. So I've rinsed out my brush and I'm picking up some of the pink, and I'm just going to come back and paint these in pink. Keep in mind while you're painting these, and I'm going to do this here real quick. If you need to turn this around to get a better angle for you to paint with, turn it around. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to paint across something that's wet. I will inevitably drag my hand through that purple paint. I am notorious for doing that. This guy over here is pretty much dry, so I'm not too worried about it. So I'm just going to flip this upside down. That way I can paint these plates without dragging my hand through that wet paint. And I am not going back to my palette every time. I ended up with quite a bit of paint on that first one, and it's quite dark, and I don't think I want it that dark. So I'm just going back and using that as my palette. I'm kind of dragging my brush through there, and it's picking up some of that extra paint, and then bring it over here and paint it on. If it starts to feel like it's drying out a little bit, just dip your brush in water real lightly. You don't have to, come back with it soaking wet. Come back and grab some more of that extra paint, and just keep using any of that extra paint to spread it around until it lightens up how you wanted it on those first couple. If you want it real dark, certainly leave it real dark. That's completely up to you. I just didn't want it to be quite that dark. So I'm just picking up the extra over there, moving it over to one of these. Now I am going back to my pan and getting a little more paint because I've used up all the extra that I had on the paper. That one got a little bit dark. Got a little bit too much paint, so I'm going to do kind of the same thing I did here. I'm going to rinse my brush off, dry it just a little bit, come drag it through here, and tap it into the one next to it just to kind of spread some of that paint around. And ultimately, they don't all have to be the same shade. If some are lighter than others, some are darker than others, that's completely okay. So there we go. Number 2 is done. Sorry, pardon my arm. Guess I could move my water, huh? And then you wouldn't have to watch my arm every time I go across there. Okay, so while that one dries, we're going to go down and do this guy. I'm going to turn this again, just so it's a little easier painting angle for me. For some reason, off kilter is better for me. So if painting straight up and down works for you, great. If not, turn it to whatever angle is good for you. Okay. And I'm going to do essentially the same thing with this one, only I decided this guy I was going to do blue. So I've grabbed some blue out of my pan, but I'm going to do basically the same thing. I don't want it to be really, really dark to start with, because I want to have the option to put some of these other colors in it and be able to see them. And if I let this blue go full strength, it is a fairly dark blue. So I started with one dip in the pan to get the color, and I'm just using water to drag that out, drag that out, drag that out. I am watching to make sure parts of it aren't drying out. If they are, I'm going over to that part that's drying out with some water. I'm going to leave his little tooth white. Now, don't panic if you do get paint in the spots that we wanted to leave white. I will show you how to fix that at the end, okay? There is an option for that. And sometimes it's hard not to get those spots, especially if they're real tiny. So if you ended up with paint in the spots that we were leaving white, don't panic. I'll show you what we're going to do with those, or what you can do with those if that happens. Okay, so almost filled in. And again, on some of these smaller spots, I'm just using the very tip of my brush. That tip goes down to a nice sharp point, and that lets you do smaller areas without having to change to a different brush. Now for this guy, I have another blue in this set. I'm going to try dotting in some of this other blue. I don't know if it's going to show up very well. We'll have to try it and see. So pick whatever color you want for yours.
if you want to put another color in. If you don't, that's okay. And I'm just making dots all over the crocodile, here and there. I did not do any on the face because typically their face is a little bit smoother than the rest of them, but you could if you wanted to, completely okay. And then whatever color you want to do for the spines across the back. Let's see. I think for mine, I'm going to use purple. So I'm just going to use my purple, paint those in. If it's wet where it bumps up against the body, it's going to bleed in a little bit, just like we did on the first one. Completely okay. And I don't know if you've noticed or not, but I'm not being all that careful. I am not following my lines very strictly. I am going out of the lines here and there. And I'm really not worried about it because I know I'm going to come back with a pen and outline these to give them a little more defined shape. And that pen outline is going to cover up some of that. So for my purposes here, I am hurrying a little bit so that this video doesn't end up being, you know, way too long. If you want to take your time and do it slower, certainly do that, but also know that if you've got some out of the line spots, the black outline that we're going to come back with is going to fix some of that. Okay, so I'm going to zoom this back out real quick. Okay, so there we go. There's our color portion to start with. So we need to make sure these are good and dry before we come back with any kind of outlines. So if you have a hair dryer, you can go blow dry this with your hair dryer. Don't hold the hair dryer right close to it because sometimes extreme heat can change the colors a little bit. So I would do it on a medium or low heat and hold it back up off of it. That's hard to see 3D. Hold your blow dryer off of it like that far. And just kind of blow dry the whole thing until it's all dry. If you don't have a hairdryer or don't want to use that, just set it aside for 15-20 minutes and then come back to it and it should be dry enough by then. So I'm going to go blow dry mine real quick and then we'll be back to outline them and add some embellishments, okay? Okay, mine are all dry, so we're going to start outlining now. And I did grab one more pen because I mentioned showing you how to fix the spots that we wanted to leave white in case you got any paint on them. And what I grabbed is a white Posca paint pen. These are acrylic paint pens, not watercolor, so that means they're quite opaque. You can't see through them very well. So we're going to use this if we have any spots that we intended to leave white but we got paint on them. We could just fill them in with this white paint pen and make them white again, okay? And you can also use that as embellishments. We might do that on maybe the purple one or the blue one because the white shows up on those darker colors really well. So yeah, if you don't have a white paint pen, those are really good. And I will include in the description what that pen is so that you know. So I'm going to zoom you back in so we can see that top one real well. And we'll start with that one. Okay. All we're going to do with this guy is start outlining it. The pen that I am using is a Uni-ball Eye ballpoint pen. I love this pen because it is waterproof. Doesn't matter so much because we've already let these dry, but if I get this outlined and then I decide I want to go back in and add some more watercolor around it, once I let this pen dry, I can do that and the black of this pen is not going to bleed into my watercolor painting. So I love these pens for that purpose. So with this, all I'm really going to do now is just start outlining my whole thing. And I mentioned that if you kind of go out of the lines a little bit, you can correct that with the pen, because that pen is going to go over and fill in some of those spots that you went out of the lines. So I'm just using this to outline everything. Those spots for my eyeballs that were dark, I'm going to fill those in with the black. And you can see how those stand out a whole lot more now than they did before. And I'm going to do that whole thing, do that on my whole thing, all three of them.
So I'm going to speed this up a little bit while I do that part. You get the idea. We're just outlining everything, and then we'll come back and do some more embellishing of these, okay? All right, everybody's outlined. Isn't it amazing what a difference just adding a little bit of black ink does to those? It just never ceases to amaze me how adding just that little bit of definition completely changes the way these look. So from here, we're going to embellish these a little bit. And I do want to point out something real quick because I don't think I mentioned it very well when we were drawing and painting earlier. The alligator's eyes I made all black. So I colored those circles in all black. We're going to add some white to that to make his eyes almost the opposite of these. These are white, but we're going to put a little black dot in them. And it's just two different ways to do eyes. So I'm going to use my little white paint pen and put a couple of dots there to give him some eyes. Either way works, however you choose to do it. I am going to show you on this little guy up here, I ended up with some paint and pencil mark in that top tooth. So that white paint pen that I showed you, I'm going to come in with that white paint pen and just paint in that tooth, and there's a little bit on his eyeball as well, and a little bit on this one down here. So I'm just kind of dabbing that white paint pen in wherever I had paint or pencil marks or pen marks to cover them up and make them white again. So it almost works like an eraser, but it's white paint. Okay, so embellishments for these. What do we want to do with them? Really, the sky is the limit. You can do whatever you'd like. I'm going to, I think on this one, I'm going to add some circles around some of these dots, and I'm going to put some lines on the plates. You could do them with the black pen. You could do them with a different colored marker. You could even come in with some additional watercolor and maybe a smaller brush and do it. I like to do these things with a pen just because that's a style I like. So on the plates on this one, I'm just making a few straight lines in each of them. And that just gives them a little bit of character. When you look at pictures of dinosaurs that look like this, you often see those plates look like they have lines in them to give them a little bit of dimension. So that's all I'm doing. I am going to add a little smiley on the top of his mouth. And then I'm just going to create some random circles. Zoom in just a little bit. And they're not, well-defined, exact circles. You can see they're kind of messy circles around some of those dots that I put on here. And I don't think I'm going to do all the dots. I'm just going to do some of them. Just to give him a little bit of fun. These kind often have toenails on the fronts of their toes too, kind of like elephants. So I'm going to add a little toenail in black on the front of each foot. Now, since I pulled out my white pen, you could do something like add spots by just tapping, in this case white, and you can see how that white shows up nice on that dark purple. Or you could do it with a different pen. You could do it with watercolor paint, whatever you wanted to do. It's just going to give that guy a little bit of character. For my alligator, what are we going to do with this dude? I think on this dude, I'm going to draw some scales on the top part, because they often have more scales on the top, and they still have scales on the bottom. They're just lighter and maybe less defined. So I'm just going to go in and make L shapes here and there, kind of at random. I don't want them to line up. I want them to be really random. And I'm going to do those L shapes all the way across. Look, see, I told you I was notorious for sticking my hands in stuff. I found some black ink somewhere. And I left a mark on my paper right there. This is where that white pen comes in handy. If you do something like that, I got white pen on my finger and then I put it on the paper right there. You can just go with that white pen, paint right over the top of it, and it will make it white and nobody will ever notice.
Okay, so back to my L shapes on my alligator here. And they don't have to be perfect. You can vary the size of them, how long the tops are, how long the bottoms are, and just work your way all the way to the back. So he ends up looking something like that. And I think I'm going to come in with my white pen and just give him a few little contour lines on the bottom. Okay. For this guy up here, I think I'm going to use that white pen. And I'm actually going to turn it upside down for a minute, so it's going to look weird on the video, but I've got wet marker on the bottom that I don't want to drag my hand through again. So he'll be upside down while we do it, which is fine. But I'm going to do kind of the same thing that I did on the first one, only I'm going to do it in white. I'm going to draw some circles around some of these dots, but I'm going to make them kind of random circles. I'm not going to do them very carefully. And then maybe put a few dots. And I think I'm going to put a polka dot at the top of each of his back spikes. Do dinosaurs have polka dots on their back spikes? Probably not. Do I care? Nope. All right. So there we go. There's some reptiles for you. I am going to pull the tape off of this real quick because I just want to remind you that if you are using something like painter's tape, and it can be real sticky, even if you stuck it on your pant leg or your shirt, something like that, before you put it on the paper, when you pull it off at a real sharp angle away from the paper. You can see I'm pulling it away from the paper. That way, if it does happen to grab the paper and rip it, it's going to rip it out towards the edge. So it'll rip it this way, and it'll only rip a little bit of it. It won't rip it this way back into the middle of your painting. Okay, so just remember when you're taking your tape off, and that's a good rule of thumb for any tape. Can't get that one to come off. For any tape, any of them have the potential to rip the paper. Some do it more than others. You can see that grabbed, there's a paper backing on this board, so you can see it grabbed that paper backing on the board. So just do it slowly. Run them at a sharp angle away from your painting. You can make it a little bit easier if you like hit it with a blow dryer for, I don't know, 15-20 seconds first and get the tape warm. It will often peel off a little bit easier and is less likely to rip your paper. And so that's kind of a good thing you can try whether you're painting dinosaurs and reptiles or flowers or whatever it is you're painting. Heating that tape up a little bit can help it rip off easier and avoid ripping your paper. So there we go. There's our critters. So lots of you asked for those. I hope those are fun for you. Certainly I didn't do too many embellishments on them, but you can jazz them up however you want to. You know, if you wanted to make their outlines less exact, you could come back with your pen and just make some ziggy-zaggy lines across the outline. Something like that is sometimes a fun effect to do. It makes them look a little, not really fuzzy, but just more whimsical. I kind of like to do that to him sometimes. Flip him around and get his face. So you would just come back over the top of the original line you did and just essentially scribble over the top of it. I'm just being careful to not go too far so it doesn't look real weird, but you can see. So you can embellish these up however you want to. I've got lots of embellishing ideas in lots of other videos, but a lot of times it's just playing around with them. Put color where you think you should have color. Put lines where you think you should have lines. Use dots and basic shapes and letter shapes, all kinds of stuff. Excuse me.
use different colors. Like I said, you could come back in with different colored markers and use markers in addition to the white and black pens. So have fun with it, embellish them up however you want to. These are good for the kids to do too because they're not real hard to draw, and just have fun with them. So everybody that's been asking for these for years, literally, I hope this fills what you were asking for. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please put them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them, and I will talk to you soon.